Thank you, Maria Vanessa, for bringing us all in. And you actually mentioned a bunch of things that I don't have to, like keeping yourselves on mute and then unmuting when you need to. We'd love it if you have a pen and paper handy. And actually, if you have a couple of markers, colored markers, that would be great as well. When we use color to write things down, it actually stimulates our imagination and our creativity. So it can be really, really helpful. The other thing is, it would be lovely if you show your screen, and if you don't want to, that's totally okay. If you just want to have your name there, so we know you're here, your presence is what's important. And really, what we're hoping all of you, what will happen tonight is that you'll gain some valuable insights to help you create a fulfilling next chapter in your life, wherever you're at right now. And of course, we encourage your interaction, particularly in the chat. That would be awesome. So I'm going to keep us moving, and let's go on to our next slide.
Thank you, Elise and Maria Vanessa. Thank you again for enabling us to guide and lead this workshop this evening. I'm very excited and very pleased to introduce my colleague, Elise Parisi. Elise is a licensed social worker. She is a life designer, a psychotherapist, a life and business coach, and an intentional creativity coach. Elise is going to be leading you through some interesting creative exercises this evening, and you will see that she is a very creative presenter and colleague. So Elise, welcome.
Thanks, Leah. And so I would love to introduce Leah. And Leah Frankel, she's an amazing woman who has an MBA and has done so much in the workplace over her 30-year career, which was at L'Oreal. And so Leah brings all of that expertise with her into now retirement. And she does a bunch of different things. And Leah, I'm so glad that we're doing this together.
The slide in front of you is just a brief disclaimer, very self-explanatory, and so we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, and we can go to the next slide, which introduces our topic for this evening. Some of you may be wondering how we chose the topic, I'm retired and others close to me are not. And we just wanted to explain to you why we did. Last year, Elise and I were presenting the topic of 5 ways to make the best use of your time and enjoy retirement. And one of the online participants said that the reason she was taking part in the program was that she was planning to retire and her significant other was not. And so that really kind of got us thinking, and we thought that it would be a very interesting topic for our next workshop. And so here we are. Elise is going to present the first topic, which is the common emotions and conflicts that you would be feeling with your spouse or significant other in retirement. I'm going to do the second part of the program, which is assessing 3 other social relationships, and we will get into those more specifically as we get to that part of the program.
So what we'd love to know is, where are you in the retirement journey? Because some of you who are here tonight are really thinking about retirement, and it'll happen sometime in the future, maybe in the very near future, but not quite now. And then some of you are recently retired, and really 2 months to a year. And then others are retired for a lot longer. And so we'd love it if you put in the chat where you are in the retirement journey, just so we know who is here tonight. So if you could put in the chat thinking, recent retirement or recently retired, and retiree. Great. Thanks. Gail said thinking about retirement. Thinking. Oh, and for those of you, some of you mightn't know where the chat is. So let me tell you where that is. At the bottom of your screen, for most of you, you'll see a chat icon, which is along with a bunch of other icons, and it says chat. And if you click on it, a box will come up, and then you can actually type in your message.
We seem to have responses across the board, Elise. There are a lot who are thinking about it. There are people who are a year in. So it seems to be that it's across the board for a variety of reasons.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, it's lovely to have you all here wherever you're at in the journey. So we're going to move on to the next slide, which is this first part, which is the common emotions and conflicts that come up in retirement, particularly in your relationship. It's your spouse or your significant other or your primary relationship, that person most probably you live with and probably have lived with for a long time, or it also might be recent as well. But this part is in relationship to that primary relationship you have in your life. So we're going to examine the communication challenges that arise. Excuse me, I've got a bit of frog in my throat tonight. Don't quite know why right now, but anyway, we'll work with that. And how you can navigate those differences in daily life. And when you think about emotion and conflicts, they're going to come across, in all parts of life, right? But it really does depend on your personality, your communication style, and the couple's specific circumstances. So we're going to look through this lens of common emotions and conflicts. And when I say emotions, we're really talking about feelings. And feelings and emotions, we're just going to use interchangeably tonight to make it easy. So in order to navigate retirement or thinking about retirement, both people must maintain open and honest communication, showing empathy and understanding, being able to listen, and being flexible to ensure that both partners feel valued and fulfilled. Now, I know that's a mouthful, and I know sometimes it can be easier said than done to be open and honest in communication, to be empathetic, especially if we're feeling annoyed about something, to show understanding, to actively listen when all we want to do sometimes is speak. So let's do an exploration here. So we're going to explore this through drawing. And what I'm going to ask you to do is take a piece of paper and draw a column down the middle. Okay, you can see I've drawn a line down in the middle of this page. So if you have a lined piece of paper, that's fine too. So draw the line, and then I'm going to ask you on the left-hand side to draw how you feel about being retired or still working. And we're just going to take a minute. And by the way, this is not about being a really good drawer. You do not even have to know how to draw. All you're doing is taking the marker or the pen and you're moving it across the page. So it might be an absolute scribble, but I'm going to ask you to trust it. So all you're doing is moving the pen on the left-hand side of the page and to draw how you feel about being retired or still working. And we're just going to take a minute. And this drawing may not make sense to you. Just trust whatever comes out of your pen or your marker. So about another 10 seconds. So let's move to the right-hand side of your page, okay? And I'm going to ask you to draw how you think your retired or working partner feels about life. In other words, it's about the other person, your spouse, your significant other. How you think they feel about life, whether they're retired or they're still working, but they're your partner. So again, take a minute to draw that. And so if you finish drawing, I'm going to ask you to think about what arose for you. Now, you might want to add some words to the drawing. By the way, if I asked everyone to show their drawings, which I may in a moment, those who want to, you'll see how different they are. But what arose for you in the drawing? What sort of differences are there? And you might want to put that in the chat. Like, what arose for you? I'll show you mine, right? It's quite different. This is me here, and this is thinking about my significant other. So I'd love it if people could put in the chat. Yep, you're right, Dawn. Somebody said that some people are solos, and you're absolutely right. But what we're doing in this part of the workshop is, even if you imagined or had or didn't have somebody else, this is in relationship to your significant other. Someone said, does this apply to single people too? Well, yeah, I mean, we're going to get into the next section later with Leah, which is around friends, co-workers, but in this part, the first part of the workshop, we're thinking about the significant other in our lives. Somebody else doesn't have a significant other either. She's a widow.
Could it be, Elise, though, that if they do not have a significant other, they could do a comparison between themselves and say somebody else that they're close to?
Absolutely.
As part of the exercise.
Yeah, it could be a really close friend, somebody who has their confidences, they share confidences. Yeah. Did anybody see that the drawing was really different, one side and the other? Okay, and we can certainly move on to the next slide, so we'll do that. So, some of the feelings, we're looking at some of the thoughts and ideas that come up that can lead to conflict when we're thinking about retirement. So let's look at the first one, which is expectations. And, we can all have different expectations about how retirement will be spent and what sort of activities we want to engage in. And of course, conflicts can arise when those expectations don't align. So the question would be like, what are the major different expectations you or your spouse have, or you as your significant other or that person close to you have? What are some of those differences? For instance, some you might have around time. One is much more flexible now about time, and the other who's still working, there's not that flexibility. And what conflicts arise when you have different expectations? So asking these questions in order for you to think about the differences around the thoughts and feelings that arise around expectations. So if anybody would like to put something in the chat about something that comes up for them, I imagine that that would also be helpful for others who might be experiencing the same thing. If there's age differences, what sort of expectations do you have? Is it necessarily that the older person retires first and the younger one keeps working? Maybe it's the opposite way around. And especially if there's health issues, that can also lead to an earlier retirement. And how do you accommodate each other's needs and desires? And sometimes, there might be some regrets or yearnings that come up. I didn't accomplish enough, or, wow, I still want to do so much more. Did I retire too early? I mean, all these sorts of things come up around expectations. So these are all questions to really have you thinking. Then, there's an adjustment period. Like both people need time to adjust to new and dynamic roles. As roles and routines will have changed significantly. Somebody where both people were working all the time and all of a sudden they're not. It's important to be patient during this transition time. So the question would be to consider how much time you need to adjust to being in retirement. And sometimes retirement comes up suddenly. It's not planned for, and other times it is planned. What feelings arise? And I'd love it, people want to put something in the chat. If something comes up for you with these questions, we'd love to hear. It's very easy to say, be open to the unexpected, because so much of the time we want to control what's going on in our lives. I mean, who can relate to wanting to be in control? If I probably see a whole bunch of raised hands. But the thing is, we often don't have control over other people, places, and things. All we have control over, and not even always, is ourselves and our reactions. So this is sort of a caveat, like planners beware, because we can plan, but the plans don't always happen the way we expect them to. And the invitation to be patient. It's like, if you start a new medication, for example, and in the first week, 2 weeks, you have all of these symptoms and all these side effects come up. But then once those 2 weeks are over, often those side effects go away. That's just a little example, but the idea is to be patient during this initial period. Because it's adjusting to no paycheck, other than, yes, Social Security or maybe a pension, right? Daily structure. And, when we're working, there's inbuilt social interaction. All of a sudden now, there's not. So if anybody wants to put something in the chat around the adjustment period, feel free. Freedom and relaxation. The retired spouse may be experiencing a lot, this new sense of freedom and time to relax. Time where they no longer have all of the daily responsibilities of a job. And this may be a time that you've said, okay, now I'm retired, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do all these hobbies, I'm going to travel, I'm going to engage in all these activities that I enjoy, that I never had time for. I'm going to clean out these closets that I've never been able to get to, all of these things. And the question is, looking at how have your responsibilities changed or not? Are there expectations, again, that the other person who's not retired in relationship, do they have expectations of you or feelings around this newfound freedom and relaxation that you now have and the other person doesn't, or the other person has and you now don't, right? It can be interchangeable. What activities will you now pursue? So how can you explore ways, that you can do things without imposing or creating resentment for the other person? And this really comes from having open communication as well. And how will the non-retired spouse or person or other person in your life who's important, how will they feel? So what sort of conflicts might arise? Anybody got any sense of those? Are there any conflicts that have arisen for you around retirement and this idea about this newfound freedom and ability to be able to relax and take time out and do what you wish? You want to put that in the chat? Because I will give a caveat while people are thinking that, this idea about jealousy or resentment And it may not always be obvious. It might be under the surface in terms of little snips or snipes, or the other person feeling smug, or, you know, it's being sensitive to both sides. The person who's spent so long working and now is ready for retirement, and then the other person chooses or doesn't choose or feels like they have to. Yeah, Kathleen said, I think that my husband will be more activity driven and I would like more time for introspection and reading. Wonderful. I mean, that really gives a great example of two different styles of personality and what brings enjoyment for you in your life. Yeah, that's a really great example. And it's giving each other the space to be able to do that. So another area is purpose and fulfillment. So let me ask all of you, what makes you happy? If you could put in the chat in 1 or 2 words, when you think about what makes you happy, we'd love it if you'd put something in the chat there. What makes you happy? I'm just going to wait about 30 seconds. And it could be anything. Keeping busy. Yep, that's a huge one for people. Grandkids, yeah, that's another one. Having the time to do what I want to do. Yes, yes. Serenity, doing hobbies. So we have a range here. You know, and we could dig deeper, like keeping busy doing what? Grandkids for Shari is one aspect. Oh, great. Interacting with others. Yep. Spending time with those important to me and knowing that I matter. Thanks, Leah. Yeah. And Shandy put in a really important one. I need structure. And that's one of the things in retirement is just because we have tons of time, we know, you know, that old adage, right? Who do you give something important to be done? It seems like the person who's really busy often can get it done. I mean, that's not always the case, but this idea of creating structure in retirement can also be really important. Kathleen, I enjoy watching the birds in my yard and doing yoga. And my husband is more goal-oriented exercises, guys, and like more scheduled activities. Yeah, it's really just the differences. Yep. Yep. You know, one part of being happy also is this sense of having a sense of purpose, you know, a sense of what fulfills you. And that may have changed somewhat in retirement, like being able to spend more time with the grandkids, having more time to do what you want. So, you know, what sort of things would you want to do? And how do they bring you that sense of fulfillment and sense of purpose? And I know someone else just came in. Welcome. That was great to have you here. And we're talking about purpose and fulfillment. Some people, it's a sense of contribution. And that may have happened while you're working and it may not have. But this is a piece of retirement where people either maybe volunteer or doing part-time work or all sorts of things that gives them this sense of fulfillment. And this was answered by one person, like, how's it different to your significant other? And a great, you know, example here of watching birds and doing yoga versus the husband who's more goal-oriented. Now, of course, it could be the woman who's more goal-oriented and the husband likes birds in the yard and doing yoga. That it's just points to differences between two people. And it's asking, how do you get that sense of accomplishment once retired? And there's no right or wrong here, and there's no judgment. It's simply about noticing what's important to you and having that happen. And there are many, many different ways. So that's what this slide is about this sense of contribution. So the next area is isolation and loneliness. And I'd ask you to look at those pictures. I think, sometimes a picture is 1,000 words, right? Leah and I thought this was really important one to address because sometimes we think that in retirement, oh my God, it's going to be all candy and roses. And sometimes for some people, it can actually be lonely. And that loneliness can come out of maybe before you had a sense of loneliness and now it gets exaggerated or accentuated. Or for some people, it can come out of the blue. And, we go back to that adjustment period and allowing time, like you've got more time on your hands and less built-in social interactions. And all sorts of feelings come up and they can get magnified. So if that is the case, I would really invite you to go see a counselor or speak to a mental health professional about it. And, loneliness sometimes can be depression. And if you're not eating and you're not sleeping, those sorts of things, I really encourage you to go speak to someone. That's really important. But the thing is, it could be either of you. It could be the retired person, and it could actually simply be the person who's still working who feels lonely and isolated. And often, many of us mask it. So we're really good at deception. The other piece to this is, opposites. And that was being spoken about in the chat before, about an extrovert is someone who gets their energy by being out there and doing things in the world, being really busy and being with other people. And the introvert is the person who gets their energy by really enjoying their own time. That doesn't mean they don't go out to a party, but it means once the party's over, they want to get back home and into their little cave. Right? So it's, and any of you recognize, you could probably raise your hands, how many people in relationships you end up with opposites. The extrovert is with the introvert and the introvert's with the extrovert. It's often not two extroverts together or two introverts together. Sometimes, but often not. So if you want to put something in the chat around any of these issues around isolation and loneliness, feel free to do that. And then, how do you handle more flexible time? Do you, like one person said, you build in more structure? And or you learn to really enjoy and utilize that flexibility that was different than what you had before. So let's move to the next area. So the next area is financial concerns. Research shows that the number one concern of retirees is that you will outlive your income. So that may be true and maybe absolutely not true. So it's really important to get advice from a financial advisor or expert. And Leah and I, this is not our area of expertise. But what I would invite you to do is go speak to a financial advisor and expert. And hopefully you've been doing that anyway along the way, particularly in planning for retirement. And money issues generally are a major place where people in relationships at any stage of their life can have conflict, right? Whether beginning of the relationship, middle, transitioning, wanting to end a relationship. Money is a huge issue. So the things to consider are you on the same page? And I'd love it in the chat, like, are you on the same page as your significant other or not around money? Because I think what we'd find, if people actually put it in the chat, they go, oh, we're not. Or we look at money differently. Or who's the warrior? Right? Somebody's the warrior. Right. I was just looking at what was written today to do volunteering. Yeah. Well, that was about bringing structure. Yes. Somebody said we look at things differently. Thank you for saying that, because I will let you know that in many relationships, look at things differently. I know I'm a warrior in my relationship more. And my partner keeps saying, it'll be okay, it'll be okay, it'll be okay. We're just different. Right. Thank you, Jeffrey. We are not and never have been. Absolutely correct that we see things. And then Deborah says, great. We both worry. It's like, what happens when there's two worry warts in the relationship? But that can be the case as well. And so it's really, getting that help from a financial person as well. Something else that comes up around financial concerns is feeling guilty without now consistently earning income. And it's, how do you give yourself a break? How do you know that you've planned? How do you, if it's an unexpected retirement, it just is, and how can you get some help around that? And if you're the working spouse who is the primary earner and the retired spouse relies on their income, like, how do you deal with it? But how do you release guilt? Because guilt leads to resentment, leads to upset, leads to all sorts of things that can be going on, and doesn't feel good, certainly, if anybody can relate to that. And the question is there another option? Now, you might talk to your partner and say, okay, maybe part-time work is an option. Yes, volunteering could be, but that's not going to bring in any income. And maybe you could go do a part-time job. And I know Leah's going to speak to this somewhat, but something you really enjoy, something you've always wanted to play with and you never could. But looking at what are some other options so that these financial concerns don't keep bringing up conflict. So the last area is to look at stress. Okay, who has stress in their lives? How many of you still have stress in your lives, no matter where you're at? If people could write yes, I'd love to see. I imagine if everybody did, there'd be a whole bunch of yeses. Do we have yeses? Of course, yes, yes, yes. Yeah, yeah. We all have stress, and that is a response to living. Stress is just knowing that we're alive. We have cortisol that's populating through our system, and that we need to find ways to deal with it because it is a constant. It just is. I think that picture shows it, right? There's kind of, right? Right. The issue is that the stress levels can be different once the spouse is no longer, or the significant other is no longer working. Once one is a little more relaxed, and the assumption is that it's the retired one. Maybe the retired person is more stressed than the one who's actually working because they're in this thing that they've been doing and it's consistent and it's fine. So the question is, how do you identify the stresses? And if you were to identify one right now in your life that keeps coming up, what is it? You might want to write it in the stress, right? In the chat. But is it family? Is it parents? Is it one particular parent? Is it kids? Is it our society or political backdrop right now? Is it society? Is it health? Right? What is it? Okay, work is a stress. Yep. Yep, might be a whole bunch of things that people write. Health, money. Yep. Trying to do too much all at once. That's great. That gets to the whole issue of multitasking, which as human beings, we think we're good at. We are not. We really can't hold and multitask, even though we try to. So there's lots and lots of ways that stress comes up. And are there health differences that impact your stress? Someone where there's ailing health. I have someone I know I'm working with who retired and then got a disease, right? And something, it's like the unfairness of why now I've retired, I've worked for, 75 plus years and now bam, right? But health is a real issue that comes up for people. And then we need to, generally, whether we're not, sick, have a disease, or we're healthy, we still need to pay attention to our health. So how can you reduce your stress? And look at what's worked. What have you tried that's worked? I mean, everybody's different. right? Because sometimes we forget the most obvious things are right in front of us. So the person who loves to be busy, it may be a way of toning down some of that busyness, doing an activity, a particular activity that is de-stressing. For somebody else, it might be playing a game. For somebody else, it might be getting active, and getting active like exercising in nature. For another person, it might be creating stillness or meditation. And by the way, you don't have to just sit to meditate or to be still. You may walk. You may do a really slow walk in nature. So I encourage you to do that. Somebody says more exercise, more self-care, managing time. Yep. Watching the bad news on TV and that, right, that will absolutely stress you out. So less TV watching, right? And certainly less political TV watching.
Mm.
Work is stress, looking forward to retiring. Yep. So let's take a moment right now and do some deep breathing. And deep breathing, even 3 deep breaths, it slows down, it quiets your nervous system. And rather than getting into the whole theory about the vagus, the dorsal, and the middle of the road, I don't want to get into any of that. But the whole point of deep breathing really slows us down and allows the cortisol to reduce. So I'm going to ask everybody to take a full exhalation first, like breathe out, like a full, and now breathe in and breathe out and breathe in and breathe out and breathe in and let it go. And what you notice, even in those short breaths, lengthening the breath a little bit, allowing an out breath first, which is allowing that stress out, and then breathing in. What did you notice, even with 3 or 4 deep breaths? I'd love it if you put it in the chat. So you can do a couple of deep breaths. A minute's great. You do not have to do 20 minutes of deep meditation. That's not true. That's not real. 5 minutes, 1 minute can do wonders. Relaxed, feeling, muscles seem less tight. Absolutely. Calming. Yes. Yes. And you can deepen that just by slowing the breathing down. There's something, if you want to look it up, called HeartMath, HeartMath. It's wonderful, and it gives a lot of credence to deep breathing and breathing in and out through your heart. It's a really great way of de-stressing. So this is something you can all look up. So from this place of being a little calm, a little more relaxed, I'm going to turn it over to Leah, and we're going to move into assessing social relationships. Oh, you know what? I'm wondering before we do that, is anybody, let's ask if anybody has a particular question or anything they want to ask right now before we move into the next section, or any particular comment you want to make. Okay, so we'll move on. So Leah.
Thank you. Okay, so the second part of the workshop is going to deal with assessing 3 other social relationships that will become very important and pivotal to you in retirement. And while we're going through this exercise or this part of the workshop, we're again going to assume that one member of the relationship is retired. The other member may be retired, it's possible, but again, we're also thinking about the fact that the other member or members would be working. So it could be either or. So we're going to take a look at the categories of coworkers, friends, and family. So think about this scenario for a moment. It's the first day after you've officially retired from your primary career. You're not hearing your alarm going off. You're not grabbing your cup of coffee, hopefully not spilling it all over yourself as you're running out to catch a train. You're not running into your office, meeting up with your colleagues to sit at the coffee machine, trying to catch up on what's going to happen during the week. And you're definitely not running into a meeting. Now, many of you might be really happy that this is taking place, and it may be the case for maybe the first couple of days after you retire, maybe the first couple of weeks, maybe even a little bit longer. But at some point, you may start to think about, what am I going to do next? Or who is my social network going to be? Who am I going to interact with on a somewhat regular basis? While people in your office weren't necessarily your closest friends, they were a pretty consistent social network for a period of time. And now you have to think about how you are going to deal with the next grouping of people in your life. So the next part of this program is going to hopefully give you some ideas as to how you can create this new network of either your former coworkers and or your friends and your immediate and extended family. So Elise, you can move to the next slide. Let's start first with coworkers. If you are planning to retire, how many of you are thinking about whether you would want to continue a relationship with a coworker or with some of your coworkers once you retire? And let's assume that they're still working. And if you've already retired, are you having any continued relationships with former coworkers? And in either scenario, why would you be thinking about doing this? And if you'd like to, you can put some of your responses in the chat. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So let's look at some reasons why you might want to. Well, the first one is it could be someone who you trusted during your career. A lot of times people can be somewhat wary about the people they're working with, but there may have been a person who you really trusted when you were working, and that person became a confidant. The next one could be someone with whom you shared common interests. And obviously, if you're retired and you still want to have some connection with some of your former coworkers, these are people with whom you shared common interests and common day-to-day activities. The next one is an interesting one. It's possible that you may want to stay in the networking loop with some of your networking partners when you were working, because you may need them for future recommendations. Now, from a personal perspective, for me, and Jeffrey says, most of my associates are clients. I work for myself, will not be in touch with 95% of them. And that's one way to look at it in terms of how your work situation was. If you were in an office scenario, for instance, as I was, or even depending upon the people with whom you had a lot of contact, I actually developed some very close social relationships with some of my coworkers, and some of them were actually mentors of mine. They were people who I really trusted, and they actually became close friends of mine after I left my job. With some, I obviously had some shared interests, and interestingly enough, as Elise had mentioned before, in addition to the business that I have now in terms of consulting, I also do some part-time teaching, and the relationships that I've made, I've been able to go back to some of these people, and they have given me recommendations for future employment. So that actually was very helpful as well. Next slide. So we might want to think about, how would we want to continue these relationships if we decide to do that? Well, certainly virtual coffees are very, very easy. We're having a virtual meeting now. It takes the complication out of things, makes things very simple. Of course, you can have an opportunity to meet a former coworker in person. And of course, social media and communication apps are things that we all use every single day. Okay, next slide. There are a few things that we should be considerate of when we're trying to form a relationship with a former coworker. The first, of course, is a financial consideration. And in everything we're going to talk about in this slide, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is we never really know what's going on behind the scenes. So let's assume that maybe you're retired, your former coworker is still working. Both of you may have financial constraints that the other person doesn't necessarily know about. So perhaps if you want to meet in person, for instance, it might be a great idea, or at least for the first time or second time, to keep things on a relatively inexpensive basis. The next thing you may want to be aware of are time and distance constraints. Let's assume for the most part that the retired person is the one with a more flexible schedule. The person who's still working probably has a tighter schedule. So you might want to consider meeting either virtually or even in person in the morning for a coffee or something like that, where it wouldn't necessarily impede on either one's time. And the other part is, of course, distance. You may want to set up a schedule to meet that is more equidistant between two locations, perhaps between where the working person is at their location and the retired person is based on their residence. And the last one is, of course, the impact of life cycle events. A lot of times when we're retired, we may have more flexible time and we think that everybody else may be on the same page. And of course, if the other party is working, that might not necessarily be so. So we just need to be aware that things can be canceled or postponed based on the other person's things that may be coming up in their life. And we just have to be understanding of that. And if we want to continue the relationship, we can just move on and try to reschedule. So to conclude the section on coworkers, if we want to make this relationship work, we would probably want to try to select dates and times that are amenable to both parties. We want to have activities that are going to reflect common interests because that makes the relationship a whole lot easier. Certainly, we want to keep in mind activities that are financially and logistically manageable. And we want to make sure that our conversations stay on a positive note for the two of us. So if anybody would like to add anything in the chat about relationships and interactions with coworkers, former coworkers, certainly do that before we go on to the next topic. And if not, I'm sorry.
I'm thinking, some people might have some fears or some thoughts or concerns about, coworkers and relationships and what's right, what's wrong. So if that's coming up for anybody, please feel free to put that in the chat.
Oh, from Kathleen, I've made plans to see former coworkers at a lunch place and at parks for walking, and I have others. That's great. It's actually very nice for the people that you want to maintain that relationship with. It's really nice to reconnect with them. It's very meaningful, and a lot of times you can share a lot of common things between you, and it works out to be a very, very nice relationship. And for me personally, again, the relationships I've kept afterwards with coworkers have actually lasted several years.
And I think the thing is, Leah, right? That all different ages. It doesn't mean that somebody's going to be the same age.
Exactly. You can have a relationship with a coworker at any age. Even if you're retired, the person that you're associating with can be the same age, younger or older. Okay, the next topic we're going to talk about are friends. And retirement can be a time to continue existing friendships, which is, of course, always a good thing to do if you can. It can also be a time to reconnect with friends that you've lost touch with. You can certainly seek out new friends with common interests, or, you may want to consider letting go of friends who may not bring you joy. So you have 4 options there. So let's take a look at our existing friendships. So at the beginning of your retirement transition, it might be easier to have a relationship with someone who you've known for a long time and someone with whom you've maintained connections with and who's gone on life's journeys with you. So if you are in retirement now and you want to continue a relationship with some of your friends, would you want to comment on that in the chat? And if you would also like to reconnect with some friends that you've lost touch with, perhaps you'd also like to comment on that in the chat as well. Existing friends, of course, you have that relationship of established trust and loyalty, which is very important if you want to continue that conversation. And it's also somebody with whom you're going to feel more comfortable, or certainly comfortable, especially as you start your retirement transition. Okay, next slide. So if we want to continue our relationships with friends, how are we going to do that? Well, certainly, again, we have our opportunity for virtual coffees or any kind of virtual meetup is very easy. We can certainly meet in person if you want to. And one of the things that you can certainly do with friends that might be a little bit easier to do with friends than, say, a former coworker, is sometimes you may want to go on an outing with them or a weekend trip. I just spoke with someone who just went on a full week's outing with some friends of hers, which they do every single year. Of course, there's always social media again and communication apps. Okay, next slide. A couple of things to be considerate of. Kathleen says, old friends are still a part of my life. They're still working, but we talk on the phone or I guess have pictures. Oh, I'll talk a little bit about my personal relationships later, but I have maintained friendships for a very long time, which has become very, very helpful and very, very satisfying for me as well. Let's talk about what we can be considerate of as we have our relationships with friends. Number one, different lifestyles with the passage of time. As time passes, obviously, people's interests change. What you and your friend had in common with in terms of lifestyles when you were maybe in high school or college could certainly be very, very different now. The same with financial situations. Either party, their financial situation could be very, very different than the others. Something else we really need to be mindful of as time, depending upon whether the retired person has more constrained time or not versus the timing of the working person who probably has more constrained time than the retired person. And then, of course, I put a little caveat at the bottom saying being aware of, excusing bad behaviors in favor of long-term relationships. And that's a little sensitive. I mean, what would you consider a bad behavior? Would you consider that to be hurtful words or somebody making a personal attack against you? Perhaps someone who's still working, taking advantage of a retiree's newfound freedom, as an example. But honestly, sometimes because the relationship has been such a long one, a long time, people may decide to overlook what they would consider bad behaviors, you know, to keep that long-term friendship going. And it really comes down to what you're willing to put up with. And we understand that everyone's situation is different. Okay. So yes, Deborah, interesting that social relationships already changed as a result of COVID. That's very, very true. I think certainly I can just say right off the top, as we were saying with Maria Vanessa before, you know, now with the advent of COVID, we have the opportunity to do these virtual online presentations. So COVID has certainly changed the dynamic of friendships and relationships in general. Hopefully at some point for the better too. For this slide, we're basically talking about options you have. With reconnecting with friends you've lost touch with that I've mentioned before. And the other one that's really interesting is developing new friendships. A new friend can give you a fresh point of view. A new friend you may find somebody who has new interests and interests that may align more with yours than some of your existing friends. But one thing about new friendships that we always understand is that it can be a little bit daunting, perhaps, or scary, or even challenging to go out of that comfort zone that you have to try to make new friends. But again, I'll say in a few minutes from personal experience, it can actually be quite rewarding to find a new friend. Okay, next slide. So how do we find new friends? Well, finding new friends, there are many ways to do that. Certainly, people were bringing up before about volunteering at the beginning of the presentation. Volunteering is a great way to meet new people. Fitness and wellness classes are another. Most town, county, and local areas have activities where you can meet new people. The ladies in this picture seem to have been involved with some kind of hike or a walking tour. There are book clubs that you can participate in. If you Google the word meetup, there is an umbrella organization that breaks down into many subgroups, all based on interests. And there are so many of them. You can find the opportunity to meet up with all different kinds of people who share your interests. If anyone wants to put into the chat now, it would be very interesting to know whether or not you have found new friends either in this part of your life or if you're considering retirement, if you're in retirement, if you've found any new friends and how you've done that. While we're waiting, if anyone wants to do that, I'm just going to highlight from my own personal experience. I've actually been very fortunate to have continued a lot of my friendship relationships that I had started even in high school and college. And interestingly enough, over the past several months, because of certain things that had happened in life cycle with my other friends, I reconnected with friends that I haven't been in touch with for quite a long time. Now, what I also wanted to bring up is Elise and I actually met and decided to collaborate as a result of my being in my second chapter of retirement, but starting my own consulting business. I actually joined a workshop that she was leading herself. And afterwards, she and I started to talk, and we decided that it would be a great fit if we collaborated on workshops and things that we're doing. So Elise and I actually became friends as a result of my retirement. So it does work. If you want to try, trying to seek out new friends in this next chapter of your life, it can be a little bit scary at the beginning, but it's very, very satisfying when it works. Next slide. So to make it work, next one.
Okay.
We can maintain existing friendships that bring happiness, certainly. We can expand our friendship circle to explore new interests and get a fresh point of view, as long as each party is considerate of others' time, as well as financial and logistical constraints. So before we go on to the section on family, if anyone would like to comment about any relationships or anything to do with friendships of any kind, we'd welcome your comments in the chat.
Like, I'm really curious about what it's like when, obviously relationships that work and keep going, that's fantastic. But what happens when you're in retirement and you have more time and other people who you are friends with, they're still working and it just doesn't work anymore. So I'm really curious about that in terms of how people are navigating that.
Well, I'm just going to comment in terms of myself. I do have friends of mine who are still working, and we do communicate ever so often. And I think from my perspective, I always like to know what's going on in the corporate world. I always like to be catching up on news and seeing what has changed since I left, which was about 6 years ago. But from their perspective, they find it interesting to understand what it is that I'm doing now, because at some point in time, these people are going to be in a similar situation as I am in now, and they're starting to think about it. They're starting to think about what's going to happen to me next, and if you can give them some interesting ideas, it definitely helps. Kathleen says oh, I just missed the comment. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to see that, but that's one thing that I find interesting when I do speak with them. They're always interested in understanding what it is that I'm doing, because I think that they want some ideas as to what they can be prepared for when they enter into this chapter of their lives.
Yeah, Kathleen said try a new church or a new congregation and meet interesting people, library programs that you're interested in, like ours tonight, and really finding different ways to meet like-minded people.
Okay. Next slide. So now we're going to come to the final grouping of the evening that we're going to talk about, which is the immediate and extended family. Now, we are not talking about relationships with spouses or significant others. And the last two topics that I talked about is really applicable to anyone in any situation, whether you have a significant other or a spouse or you do not, because you have all this extended network of friends and family and former coworkers to interact with. But when we're talking about immediate and extended family here, we're talking about children or grandchildren. We're talking about cousins, extended family, even beyond that, siblings. From my perspective, on a personal note, while I am married, my husband and I do not have children. So while a lot of people consider retirees people who automatically have grandchildren, I'm not in that genre. So one of the things that I'm doing, and I'll talk about that again a little bit later, is what I'm doing to connect with my extended family since I don't have children. So one of the two things I wanted to bring out with relationships and family is that certainly family members can provide personal and financial interaction and support that is not always available from friends. And that's just, sometimes it's just how it is. whether it's because family members may feel obligated to do something, there is a relationship within the family that is very, very different from relationships with non-family members. But as I show in number 2, sometimes people can feel closer to friends and non-family members than they do to family, and that's just the way some things happen. If you want to put in the chat now, perhaps you might want to mention, if you're thinking of retiring or if you are already retired, how has your interaction with your family changed, as opposed to when you were working? Okay, let's move to the next slide. So we want to talk about how we're maintaining that relationship. And again, relationships and communications with family, because of the reasoning, could be a little bit different than when we're talking about former coworkers or friends. Certainly, I think that family members like to hear your voice on the phone. They like when people call them. Certainly, it's great to do FaceTime. And since I do have family members that are not within my time zone, I have to do FaceTime and I have to use WhatsApp because otherwise I wouldn't be able to communicate with them. So if you have family members and of course other people who are close to you, Jeffrey says, my children think I should retire, but I would not want to rely on them for my entire social life. Very valid point, and we're going to bring up a few things about that in the next slide or two. So we have Zoom calls, social media. One thing about family is you have family gatherings that you wouldn't necessarily have in another social setting. Children's sports, regardless of where they happen to be in the family relationship, always seem to bring families together. If they're participating in some kind of softball game, a lot of times family members want to come out and cheer for them. Not necessarily only parents and grandparents, extended family members. My niece, I'm very, very close with my nieces and nephew. If they were doing things when they were younger, I always came out to see them. Milestone birthdays and milestone events are also very, very important to family members. And again, for families, we may want to consider, making sure that we're always sending an e-card for a special event. And it's even nice, although it may not be done as often now, we may want to actually send a real card in the mail, which is something that's probably more rare these days, but something that's really, really nice to do. Okay, next slide. So to make it work, as Jeffrey was mentioning before, he may not necessarily want to rely on, his children for his entire social situation once he retires. So what I'm saying here is it's great to develop your own hobbies, interests, and activities in retirement. It is so key. I think not only from the perspective of keeping yourself active, but one of the other things that came up in a retirement study, in addition to what Elise mentioned about finances, is one thing that concerns people who are seniors or in retirement age is cognitive issues as they age. And if you develop your own hobbies and interests and activities and keep your brain active, hopefully that may stem some of that. And that's one of the reasons why sometimes I feel like I'm on overload, but I always want to keep my brain moving because I think that is so important in this next stage of our lives. The second one, have open communications with your family to find amenable dates and times to interact with them. And I'll touch on this in a moment. Again, set aside time for special dates and events. If your family tells you that in 6 months they're going to have a very special milestone birthday celebration, they're probably giving you a hint that they really want you to be there. So try to make the time in order to show up and maintain self-care. Elise was going through some of these breathing activities before. Self-care at this point in your life is really important. You want to make sure that you can remain as healthy as you can to do the things that you want to do and enjoy yourself in this next chapter. Just a couple of things to keep top of mind. While we all want to maintain family connections in this next chapter of our lives, and I don't like using the word seniors, maybe it's just me, I just like to say the next chapter. I don't really believe that people who are no longer in their primary career or in this stage of retirement can automatically be assumed to have unending free time that they can necessarily devote to everyone else, unless, of course, they choose to do that. That's why it's always great to have something that you can call your own. And again, to clarify, when we're talking about family relationships during retirement, many times people automatically think about the grandparents. You know, there are grandparents and grandchildren and children when you're retired. But again, that's not necessarily the case. As I mentioned, my husband and I don't have children. There may be people who are single for a variety of reasons. And so, in that respect, it's great to be able to reach out to any family member, to your friends, to coworkers, so that you can develop your own network that you can feel close to. And if you need someone in times of an emergency or you need someone for support for any reason, you always have a person, some people that you can rely on to help you. On the flip side, family members who are working also have limited time. So we can't necessarily make assumptions that they can always meet a retired person's schedule either. So again, that's why we need to have those open communications so we can kind of meet in the middle. So to end the conversation on family, if there's anything else that you'd like to say about family relationships, please put them in the chat before we move to slide 30.
And if there's anything particularly salient for you that's coming up that maybe we haven't mentioned about family.
Okay, next slide. So to conclude with these last three groups, we talked about coworkers, friends, and family to expand your relationships. You want to, babysitting grandchildren. Well, you can certainly do that. Again, it all depends upon what your comfort zone is and what it is that you want to do and feel comfortable doing. It's a very emotional decision, but it's all very personal. Every person has his or her own idea as to how they are going to feel fulfilled, how they're going to feel like they're making a difference, they're providing value, and feel like you matter. So it's all, again, it's a very, very personal situation, a very personal relationship. And as long as you're happy with what the decision is and it works for you, it's great. Just make sure that you develop a social and support network that will keep you connected with others. And as Elise mentioned in the beginning, as she was talking about the significant other piece, although it really applies everywhere, you want to avoid loneliness and isolation always. The last one is really important. 6 months before I left my career, I started to network and expand my social relationships. Start early. Don't be in a position that you wake up the next morning after you've left your job and you're sitting up and saying you have no idea who you're going to talk to. You don't want to be in that position. You want to get up the next morning and say, I have 4 people that I can set up time with to speak with on, in a virtual situation. I can meet them. We can go and take a walk together, but you know that you have that network that's going to keep you company and make you feel that you're really enjoying yourself, that you're happy, and that you are feeling fulfilled in this next chapter. And that is the conclusion of this portion of the workshop. So Elise, I'm turning it back to you.
So if we want to leave you all with one, I mean, it's not one thing tonight, but one thought is to stay curious and communicate when you're in retirement. And what do we mean by that? So it merely means being curious, being open to new ideas and options and ways of being in life. And aging does not mean we stay still and we stay quiet. So when we communicate, it means listening and speaking. Both are important. And when you do both, it leads to more quality relationships and certainly a more quality and better retirement. So tonight, we hope that we have done that. We've helped you be more curious, and we've communicated, and we've stimulated some ideas for you to make practical in your lives. So the question right now is, what's one thing or idea you will take action on that you have learned or been reminded of? And some of what we've covered tonight, it might have been just reminding you of things versus learning things. But what's one thing or idea? And we would love it if you put that in the chat, because we know that when we write something down, we retain it, and we also may take action on it more than if we just kind of think about it. So what's one thing or idea you'll take action on that has come up for you tonight that you've learned? And I'm going to take a minute to let people write that down in the chat. I mean, you may have learned a bunch of things, but I'm asking right now for one. Ah, cool.
Oh,
Gail's,
great.
yeah, you want to read that one, Leah?
Let me just open this up. Oh, wait a second. I love the virtual coffee idea. I have retired friends. I'm not yet retired. This bridges friendships and allows me time to still work and maintain friendships. Empathy for our partner and friends.
Yeah, so virtual coffee is great. This idea of doing it online, either through an app or through Zoom or through whatever you choose to do, but it does bridge, and it is a great way to use time because you don't have to travel anywhere.
Expand that. Okay. Expand network of people to communicate with. Do not isolate. Need the time to begin this while I am working.
Yep. So expanding your network right now. And maybe reaching out to someone you haven't reached out to for a long time, right? Because yeah, when we're retirement, time to be able to.
That's cute. Don't retire. It's too much work.
Yeah.
Work on finding time to think about developing new social relationships before retiring. I have to tell you, that really is key. It is so important so that when you go into this next great chapter, you're on the road. You've got it. You've got the momentum. That's what it is. You have the momentum. You're not still. You can move on.
Yeah, and I think Kathleen raised something really important. The not that everything's not important, but to have empathy for our partner and friends, because they can feel and think and are different to who and how we are in the world. And sometimes when we put ourselves in the other shoes, we're able to see it through their eyes and see what they need as well as what we need, and not just, sometimes it's easier to make it about us. Um, yeah, don't retire too much. It's too much work. Thank you for that lightness and comedy. And anybody else have something that they've learned tonight that they want to write down? Well, we want to thank you, and please feel free to, anybody want to still write something, please do that. But we want to thank you all for being here. We know people have all sorts of things going on in their lives, alternate things they could be doing on a Thursday night, but we appreciate you being here. And you can take a photo of this last slide. We actually have a one-page summary of a presentation. We'd be happy to send it to you, email it to you, but we do need your email to be able to do that. So take a photo is the best way to capture what's on this slide. Or if you're on your computer, if anyone knows how to do a screenshot, that's a whole other thing. But take a photo of it so you've got our information. And please feel free to reach out to either one of us.
Maria, Vanessa, thank you so much for allowing us to do this workshop. We want to thank all of you for participating and being here this evening. We really enjoyed it. And we hope that we can meet up with you again at some point, perhaps at another workshop. And we really enjoyed again being here with all of you tonight.